Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel, and welcome to my review of Doctor Who FLUX episode 5, titled Survivors of the Flux. Terrible title, in my opinion. I really don't like it because it just sounds so odd. Doctor Who FLUX, Survivors of the Flux. It reminds me of Dark Eyes, when the finale of Dark Eyes was Doctor Who Dark Eyes, Eye of Darkness. It's just stupid, but anyway, yeah, this episode, I didn't like all that much, and I've really been enjoying Doctor Who FLUX on the whole, and I've really been enjoying being positive about Doctor Who, because I'm aware that when it comes to the Whittaker era, I haven't been all that positive when it comes to the show, so I was really enjoying Doctor Who again. I haven't felt consistently engaged and enjoyed a series consistently like this probably since the Smith era. Really, honestly, there hasn't been a bad episode so far this series, and it's very rare that that's happened. So ultimately, I've really been enjoying Doctor Who, if that makes sense. And I was really glad that I wasn't feeling that negativity that I felt towards series 11 and 12, and even Revolution of the Daleks. I remember Revolution of the Daleks, I was hyped for it, and I came out of it thinking this was really disappointing, and I was so glad that I wasn't having that reaction to Doctor Who FLUX, but unfortunately this episode really brought that back. As I said, I haven't done a negative review of Doctor Who FLUX so far. The most negative I got was War of the Sontarans, and even then that was only a disappointment with the ending. The rest of that episode was pretty good. This wasn't, though. This wasn't very good in my opinion, and it's hard to judge this as an episode, because like episode 1, it very much is just a load of random scenes sort of spliced together, a load of just random plot lines jumping from one another. But whereas episode 1 felt as if it had more of a structure and it was the first episode and you were just building up the plot lines and questions, it doesn't work here. That type of storytelling doesn't work here, because this is episode 5, this is the penultimate episode, and to be structuring a story like this where you're just chucking loads of things at the screen yet again, I'm sorry, it just doesn't work. I've defended the amount of storylines in this series and the lack of answers we've been getting for questions, because ultimately it's an ongoing story with multiple episodes, so ultimately we're going to get answers at some point. And even when we do get answers in this episode, it just sets up a whole bunch more questions. That just doesn't work. I think at this point in the series, you shouldn't be throwing in more plot lines and throwing in more questions. You know, this is the start of the time when you're starting to wrap things up, you know, of the plot lines, which we do get here. But there's just certain stuff that gets introduced so late into the game, which just makes me groan so much, because, you know, I'll stop being vague. The Grand Serpent stuff just doesn't work for me at all. It just really doesn't work for me. You know, at the start I was thinking, you know, it's nice, you know, we're bringing Unit back in, and we haven't seen Unit for a little while. We're getting some nice little callbacks to the Brigadier and the First Doctor story, the War Machines, and this is all quite nice, but the more you start to think about it, this doesn't work at all. And I was thinking the whole time, and obviously they come back at the end of the story, but Storm and Azure, they started off the series so well, but it almost seemed as if they sort of faded into obscurity. And now we've got the Grand Serpent throwing in another villain into the mix. We've got Aspok, was that her name? I can't remember her pretend name. She's Tecteun. So we've got Tecteun in as well, so we've got now these two other villains, but we had Swarm and Azure, and they've sort of been pushed back. And it's like, why do you have these moving parts? You could have cut one of these villains out, and the Grand Serpent should not be here. That whole plot line makes no sense, and with this series and its nature, I want to withhold judgment and say, you know, it could become relevant, but we've got one episode left, and you need to sort of look at the next show trailer, look at all the moving parts and the length of time that we've got to resolve these moving parts, and I can say with confidence that the Grand Serpent could have quite easily been cut out of this episode. All he does is he's just back in time through the ages in Unit, he takes control of Unit, and then ultimately lowers the defences so the Sontarans can take control. But ultimately, couldn't the Sontarans have just manually took down the defences? Couldn't have they just exploited Joseph Williamson's tunnels somehow? You don't need the Grand Serpent there. And also people may say, well, at the end of the day, it's quite clear that the Grand Serpent's plan is to watch the Daleks, the Cybermen and the Sontarans battle it out, and so he can then take control. But we know he's not going to take control, and the Sontarans, Daleks and Cybermen could have battled it out anyway without his influence. It just seems like throwing some randomer into the mix for no reason. Like this is the time when we should be resolving plot threads. You don't need to throw in another plot thread in the 5th episode. Like, what are you doing? It's just so dumb. It's like, I would understand it if you'd slowly set up Unit and the Grand Serpent throughout the series, even have the little scenes we have in this episode throughout the different time periods, have those appear in different episodes. That would work, but it just gets all shoved into this episode. It's like, why are you doing this? Why are you throwing this into the mix? Why? Because we've got plenty of moving parts, we've got plenty of things going on, we've got plenty of questions that need answers. Why are you throwing this in? It's so frustrating watching it, because you can just see that it's just not needed. I understand that maybe Chris Chibnall wanted to bring Unit back, maybe had a compulsion to bring Unit back, to bring Kate Stewart back, maybe he liked the Grand Serpent, he liked the actor of the Grand Serpent and thought, hey, I want to see him brought back. I think there's potential to do things with this character. Fine, I understand that. But just reserve one of the specials for it. Like, seriously, you don't need that in this series. And maybe if the Grand Serpent actually does more in the next episode, maybe I'll be proven wrong. But it was just so poorly handled, because it's just spliced in here, just throwing just this new plotline in with one episode remaining. Like, what? No, and the thing is this episode structurally doesn't work, because it's just a load of disconnected scenes jumping from one to the other, and it's done a lot quicker than in episode 1. In episode 1, there were less plot lines, and, you still spent a decent amount of time in each episode. You still had a rough plot line of what was going on. But here, there's just no structure at all. It's just a load of random stuff just happening all at the same time, and you just don't even spend that much time in one place. It's done from here to here to here to here, oh no, back to here, and then back to here, and then back to here, and it's like, please just slow down, please, because it doesn't feel as if there's much substance going on with anything. Yaz, Dan and Jericho being stuck in the past is an interesting idea. It's nice to get consequences. I said this in my last review, that I was glad that we're getting consequences from the Angels and that story. That works. I think as a trio, actually, my dad was saying this to me, they work really well as a trio, far better than Yaz, Ryan and Graham. And that's because all of these characters have a unique personality, have a unique character, and therefore they can bounce off each other and fulfill functions, and they work really well as a trio, and they're all performed wonderfully. Yaz has been so good in this series, such an improvement over her in 12 and 11, and yeah, she's really impressed me in this series, and John Bishop's good as always. I'm really liking Jericho, so they work really well as a unit, and some of the scenes with them were quite interesting. I'm quite surprised they got away with the suicide pill. I'm quite surprised they got away with that in what's essentially a children's show. What they were doing really felt as if it didn't have a purpose. They're just sort of going around the world for no real reason. Like, why is there a whole plotline about them, summoning Carvanista if Carvanista can't even get there anyway? What's the point? It just feels like such a waste of time. They're just going around trying to find out, if anyone knows when the world was going to end. But then Williamson just sort of stumbles upon them anyway. So why couldn't you have had him just stumble upon them in the beginning and then you could spend more time explaining what the hell the tunnels are, why and how he managed to do this, because yes, we get answers for the tunnels. He knew that the world was going to end, and therefore to try and save people, he opened up the tunnels, which are actually gateways to another world. Fine, I'm happy with that explanation. I actually quite like that, and I'm a big fan of Williamson. You guys know that he's just sort of crazy, and I just sort of like that about him. And the actor, I think it's Steve Oram is the name of the actor who portrays him, is very good, and I thought he was good in this episode. But not a lot of time was dedicated to what the hell was going on there. And then the Sontarans just sort of storm in. How about you introduce him earlier into the episode, because what Dan, Yaz and Jericho are doing really leads to nothing, and then explore something that has actually been set up across other episodes. Actually explore that, because there are ways you could have done it. Maybe Yaz and Dan say, hey, you know, we need to find out what Williamson was doing, because we saw him randomly after spending a lot of time in the past. They would have had time to reflect on the weird happenings that had happened to them recently and think, what the hell was going on with that Williamson guy? The tunnels, the Williamson tunnels. So let's go and find the tunnels, and then they could have stumbled upon Williamson. You know, that just could have happened. You don't need all this stuff with the hermits. You don't need them going to the Great Wall of China. You know, as fun as those scenes were, and they are fun, when you're doing a story like this, you just don't need dead space. You don't need just filler in the penultimate episode of your series. It's just, it aggravates me, because you could have answered certain questions here, so therefore there's not such a burden to answer and pay off things in the finale. But it doesn't. It just spends its time answering a couple of questions, but setting up far more questions than it answers. So therefore it's almost nigh on impossible that the finale will be satisfying. I think that's why I'm so negative about this episode, is because it feels like it's set up a finale that feels impossible to be satisfying. Chibnall would have to physically do the impossible to resolve everything and make it feel satisfying. And even if he makes some things feel satisfying and chooses not to wrap up things unsatisfyingly, instead leave those questions, roll on to other specials, which I usually wouldn't mind. I don't mind when showrunners do this. You guys know I'm a big fan of the Series 5 finale. It's my favourite episode of Doctor Who ever. There's a major part of that finale, you know, a major question building up throughout the series, who blew up the TARDIS, why, that doesn't get answered. But ultimately that was the first series of a Doctor, and therefore there was time to explore these, and that wasn't marketing itself as one big story. This has marketed itself as one big story, and therefore to not answer everything feels like it sort of cheated the audience a bit. It sort of lied to the audience, in my opinion. So there's an issue as well, but it almost seems nigh on impossible that the finale will be satisfying, just because of how much seems to be going on in that finale. There's such a ridiculous amount that appears to be going on. It's almost going to be nigh on impossible to wrap that all up satisfyingly, and my anger with this episode is because there was time that you could have wrapped some of this stuff up, but it just chooses to open up more questions. Like the Grand Serpent stuff, just cut it all out. It's not necessary. You don't need to add in another plotline. Yeah, it was cool to see Kate Stewart back, but I don't want to value fan service over a compelling and better story. This story's probably better if Kate Stewart and Unit don't return. You know, as much as I'm a Doctor Who fan and I like seeing Unit return, I like seeing Kate Stewart back, I like references to the Brigadier having a voice cameo from Nicholas Courtney, I like references to the War Machine, such an obscure first Doctor story. But ultimately, if that whole, you know, plotline isn't needed, ultimately, can we, you know, just take it out? Because we'd have a better story for it. Let's talk about the Doctor and the Division and all that sort of stuff. I've mixed feelings on this, because the sort of portrayal and how this episode goes about explaining the Division was very reminiscent of the Timeless Children to me. It's just sort of the Doctor stood in a room and Tecteun just sort of explaining their plan. It does feel very much the Master PowerPoint presentation, that sort of stuff. I understand that in this instance there's no real other way you could have done it, but it doesn't stop the fact that that whole side plot was just essentially one character explaining the whole plan of the Flux to the Doctor and in turn the audience for an hour. And in terms of what's actually been going on, so essentially the Division created the Flux to destroy the universe because the universe was learning too much about the Division because of the Doctor. No, that doesn't work. I was thinking about this, and at first I didn't mind it, but the more me and my dad thought about this, we both came to the conclusion that just doesn't make any sense. And it feels as if like a compulsion from Chris Chibnall to tie in the Flux to the Division, and the way he's sort of gone about it doesn't work, in my opinion at least. Their reasons for wanting to destroy the universe doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because the universe doesn't know about the Division. No, it just doesn't, and that's been said to us so clearly. The Doctor has been trying to find someone who knows about the Division the whole series, and she hasn't found anyone. One of them was the Carvanista, who didn't tell her anything anyway, and the other was the Angels, who the Division told to go after the Doctor anyway. And the only way the Doctor found the Division was because the Division captured her and wanted to tell her. So no one knows about the Division, so what is the point of destroying the universe? Because no one knows anything. That what? And also, the Doctor knows too. The Doctor knows nothing. That's why, oh my god. The more you think about it, the more it just makes very little sense. It really makes no sense. It's such a weak motivation. And her being Tecteun, we all sort of saw that coming. I knew she was going to be a Time Lord, I called that in episode 3. Realistically, it was obvious. It wasn't some grand prediction for myself. It was obvious, like, who else was it going to be? Her being Tecteun, I mean, she gets killed off in this story anyway. I think the actress who plays her in this story was good. I thought she was a threatening presence, but she just gets killed off anyway, so it almost feels a bit pointless. It almost feels like forced artificial connection between the Doctor and this character that doesn't quite work. We get the whole Timeless Child stuff that just sort of comes back now, and you guys know my stance on the Timeless Child. I don't like it. I just simply don't. And I don't feel as if it's justified its existence at all. I don't feel as if the Flux and the Division and that, don't feel as if you needed the Doctor's personal connection to this in any way that's more than just the Doctor being a Time Lord and wanting to stop some shady Time Lord shenanigans. I don't feel as if throwing this Timeless Child idea into the mix has really strengthened it at all, or it's really made it feel as if, yep, that was a worthy thing to throw into the canon. I don't feel as if it's justified its existence. And this episode to me merely highlighted that, yeah, I don't like it. At the end of the day, this whole series I've known that they were gonna bring up the Timeless Child again. We knew it from the start, but ever since the Division was referenced, we just knew it was coming. And at the end of the day, in Series 12, I was annoyed about the Timeless Child, but ever since I've sort of held my hands up and say, listen, it's there, I don't like it, but there's no point complaining about it, because something interesting might come of this. I can't change the past. Let's just go with the flow. And I've been doing that, and I think the problem with it is that it doesn't feel as if it's really needed here. It doesn't feel as if it's really justified its existence. The same thing with the Grand Serpent. It doesn't feel like he, and that plotline with Unit so far, feels as if it's justifying its existence. You have gone into the finale. Picture this. There's a second wave of Flux coming, going to destroy the Earth. Swarm and Azure are there with the Doctor in that Division ship. What's going on with that? Meanwhile, Williamson, Dan, Yaz, Jericho are trying to stop the Sontarans from accessing the portal to get in. Through the portals in the tunnels. They've got in. Now there's a three-way fight, the Cybermen, the Sontarans and the Daleks, to take control of the planet, but little do they know that ultimately the Flux is coming to destroy them. So Yaz, Dan, Jericho, Williamson need to help protect the Earth from the Daleks, the Cybermen, and the Sontarans. Meanwhile, the Doctor has to sort out what's going on with Swarm and Azure and try and stop the second wave of the Flux that way. That works, and I know you'll say, but George, that's essentially the framework for the next episode anyway. I know it is, but hold that thought. Let's throw in Belle, Vinda, the Passengers, Diane, Carvanista, Unit, Kate Stewart, the Grand Serpent. Also, Claire, the Weepy Angel Woman, is also in this as well. You see what I'm talking about? Is that this isn't a bad framework for a finale, but you're just throwing up so much stuff in here that just isn't even necessary. That's my biggest issue, is there seems like so many plot lines that just don't even feel necessary, that are just not going to get satisfying answers, and this finale is just going to feel so bloated. It really is, and it's going to be unsatisfying, because how can you make this with so many moving parts, so many unanswered questions? How can you make this satisfying? You know, I'm going to hold my hands up and say, hey, I don't want to withhold judgment, because there is a chance that Chibnall wraps this all up. But that's such a slim chance, and that's not even an indication of Chibnall's writing. Any writer would struggle to wrap all of this up satisfyingly. The best writer in the world would struggle to wrap this up satisfyingly. You know, that's why I think in The Big Bang it's so smart of Stephen Moffat to essentially subvert what everyone's thinking and take a completely different approach to the story, so he doesn't have to wrap up everything that's going on at the end of the cliffhanger the Pandora opens. Well, he does, but he does it in such a clever way, because he completely flips the story on its head and changes it and says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a completely different story, and it works. But that's not what's going to happen. We're going to get a more conventional style finale, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. I like conventional finales, but ultimately, with so many moving parts, a conventional finale in this way can't wrap this all up. With this many moving parts, we needed a 7th episode. This episode, to me, just doesn't work on so many levels, because it's just asking so many more questions at a time in which we needed concrete answers. It's pretty much set itself up to fail, and in my opinion, the issue is there's so many moving parts, so many storylines. But my main issue is so many of them just feel pointless. So many of them just feel as if they've been thrown in for the sake of it. So many of them feel as if they don't have a concrete purpose in the overarching story of this series. Yet they're all being thrown into the mix anyway. It's just too much. It is just too much. I think that I've enjoyed this series. You guys know I have. But I just think it's got a bit too much now. I think Chibnall has gone in over its head. This series seems to be buckling under the pressure of its own weight. You almost feel like, yeah, this is a storyline in which we're going to have multiple moving parts, but there's just too many moving parts. And it just feels like rather than answer some questions from the previously established moving parts, Chibnall said, hey, let's throw in some more moving parts. No, it doesn't work. And the thing is, it's not even that he's throwing in more moving parts, well, it is, but also it seems that these moving parts don't even feel as if they're justifying their existence. They don't feel as if they're actually, necessary. It feels as if there's a version of this story that works almost exactly the same. You just shave off half the subplots. Like, how can that happen? How can you have a version of this series which is practically the same, yet shave off half the subplots? That just shows that half of these subplots aren't even that important. They're not even that important. And, maybe I'll hold my hands up and say the Grand Serpent and Unit stuff was actually incredibly necessary to this story. But the way it's been set up, it doesn't seem as if that's going to be the case. I don't know, honestly, it's so frustrating, because I've been enjoying this series so much, but this was such a pivotal episode for the series. It's the penultimate story, and it's just just got me so worried. It's honestly, I'm so worried for this finale, because I just can't see a way in which this is good. And it pains me to say, because I was watching this, especially last week, I was thinking, could this series break into my top 5 series of the new series? Like, we haven't had a series since 2011 that's made up my top 5 series. Not since Matt Smith's second series has any series, made my top 5. It starts from 2005 to 2011. Our series contained in there. That's 10 years in which a series hasn't made it into my top 5. I really thought that this could move out Series 6 because it was looking like the story quality was so much more consistent. It looked as if we might actually be getting better answers to the questions set up than we do in Series 6. So I was thinking, could a Jodie Whittaker series actually make it into my top 5? I was really thinking this because I've been enjoying it so much. But that's doubtful now. Oh my god, it's so frustrating. Because this looked like it was going to be so good, and I've really been enjoying it. But it seems as if last minute, it's just buckling under its own weight, and, you know, hey, we'll see how it goes in the finale, you know, we'll see if it answers all its questions. But I think the worrying thing is that judging by the next time trailer, and judging by how this episode works, it's not, the probability that this episode is going to be satisfying is particularly low. Those aren't great odds. Those aren't great odds. So thank you guys for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, and if you want to see more content from me, hit subscribe. I'm obviously going to be reviewing the last episode of Doctor Who FLUX titled The Vanquishers, so, you know, stay tuned for that if you want to see it. It's a shame doing a more negative review because, as I said, I've really been enjoying being positive about this series, but at the end of the day, this episode just really made me feel quite worried, and, you know, it is what it is, and, you know, I've been incredibly negative. I don't even think if I think I said 2 positive things in a sea of negatives. This episode wasn't appalling, it wasn't terrible. But I think for what it is, for its placement in the series, it is terrible. Like, as an episode, it wasn't terrible to watch. It had its high points. I wasn't gouging my eyes out like other Chibnall episodes. But I think for what it says about the series and what it sets up and the place it leaves us going into that finale, it really is worrying. It feels as if it's derailed this entire series, and yeah, I'm really quite worried about the finale. Fingers crossed it's good, but unfortunately I just can't see it. But yes, thank you guys for watching. What did you think about this episode? Do you feel like me? Do you not? Did you really enjoy it? Whatever you think, drop your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd be really interested to read your thoughts. Let's start a discussion. That's always fun. But yes, thank you guys for watching, and of course, a goodbye. Roll on next week.